Madam Acting President, this week is budget week, and so, of course, it is left to the sole voice of purist economic rationalism to deal with the big picture around state budgets. Australia's federation is a Clayton's federation in 2023. It has been for decades, and it's only getting worse. It was this chamber in the 1890s that was the most resistant of any colonial parliament to the federation movement. We now know those forgotten but noble federation sceptics were bang on. In the 1890s, this Legislative Council agreed New South Wales and the other colonies had matured sufficiently to become independent of Britain, and Britain happily agreed. The bigger question was, what was the post-independent structure going to look like? We could either be 7 friendly independent nations or one big nation with a central government. And I say 7, not 6, because the colony of New Zealand did send representatives to federation conferences until as late as 1897. But New Zealand wisely decided to be its own nation. Led by Victoria, the southern colonies of this continent were overwhelmingly in favour of a grand, united nation with a central government, high taxation, high tariffs and an activist state. New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia, however, had their misgivings. Led by the New South Wales Legislative Council, the Federation sceptics feared a central government would grow and end up dominating the state parliaments. They were more than right, and the domination is far greater than what the sceptics feared. It's hard to calculate, but when the Commonwealth handed down its first budget in 1901, I estimate the percentage of the GDP that the Commonwealth took off the people was 1, maybe 2%. In those early days, the Commonwealth had very limited responsibilities that it was permitted to fund from its modestly permitted revenue sources, mostly customs duty. The newly created states were expected to assume all other government responsibilities. But when the most pointless war of history came along, World War I, we were told that as a one-off emergency, the Commonwealth would impose an income tax on individuals and tax on company profits. We were promised that when the emergency passed, those federal taxes would be removed. Of course, the war ended, but the taxes stayed. Commonwealth power grew. By the time of World War II, the states gave away their income and company taxation powers entirely, but we were told only until the war ended. Once again, the emergency passed, but the taxes remained. By the 1970s, this country still had powerful voices in favour of states' rights. The Prime Ministership of Malcolm Fraser is often regarded as a wasted period, but the truth is that for the first term or two, he was fiscally quite good. For several months in the late 1970s, Prime Minister Fraser did champion returning taxation powers back to the states, but the polls didn't agree. Fraser sadly backed down and his descent began. Another Prime Minister named Malcolm, on the 30th of March 2016, proposed, quote, the most radical restructuring of federal-state taxation powers since World War II. Like his namesake, Prime Minister Turnbull wanted to return income and company taxation powers to the states. I have been a critic of Prime Minister Turnbull, yet no one doubts he understands fiscal matters. But sadly, Turnbull backed away from that sound proposal within 24 hours. Today, the Commonwealth Government sets policy in most areas from Hobart to Broome. This violates the wise observation of the 19th century American economist Henry George, who was an inspiration for the great Milton Friedman, who said, quote, to prevent government from becoming corrupt and tyrannical, its organisation and methods should be as simple as possible, its functions should be restricted to those necessary to the common welfare, and it should be kept as close to the people and as directly within their control as may be. End quote. Today's New South Wales budget papers number 1 on page 4.1, the revenue page, tells us that over 40% of the income that the New South Wales government will spend is simply cash grants from the federal government. That makes us in many ways a welfare dependent off Canberra. The other states, bar shackled Western Australia, have an even higher percent of their budget doled out from Canberra. This centralisation deprives us of the dynamic power of state experimentation with deregulation, lower taxes and pro-business policies. It means if a state is an economic laggard, it doesn't really matter because Canberra will bail them out. We need to return income and company taxation powers to the state. Do we need to return to the 1901 ideal? Maybe, but maybe a central government will always grow and grow. Maybe we need to go back even further to the 1890s and ask ourselves, would the continent of Australia today be stronger, happier, more dynamic and more prosperous if we had followed the wise lead of New Zealand?
Thank you. The Honourable